Hello everybody, Kelly Rice here, but I write under the pen name KM Rice. And first off, I just want to apologize. I waited a little bit too long to film this vlog today, and now it's dark out, but I've got all the lights on in my room, and I even set up this really annoying LED flashlight that's shining right at me from the side, because I thought like that might make me more visible, just because my camera doesn't film well in low light. So I apologize for these strange conditions, but it's perfect for strange company. Today, I'm going to be talking about a question that isn't actually that strange. It was sent to me by Samara Draven, who sounds like is a very dedicated, awesome person. Like, she's the ideal person you want watching your vlog. She said she just got off work and sat in her car to watch, like, me doing this, which is really cool. Like, how many people are in their cars, like, watching? I don't know. Seriously, though, it's really cool. Okay, her question. How do you keep your original vision for a story intact while you write it? How do you keep it from morphing into something you ultimately don't know what to do with, and thus let go? I think that's a question that we all encounter almost, I want to say almost daily when you're writing every day, when you're working on a book. But you will encounter it again and again. So, how many books have I written now? 7? I think I've written 7 books, not counting the book-length fan fictions that I've written. But as someone who's written that many books, I can tell you that that way of thinking of questioning and being afraid that it's taking on a life of its own and becoming something that you did not intend to write, that gets easier to deal with the more that you write. Because the way I see it, what's happening in that process is, so you have your grain of inspiration. And in fact, if you're curious about the creative process at all, I'm sure I've recommended this before. Percy Shelley's essay, A Defense of Poetry, is incredible. I came across it when I was about 20, and I started reading it. It's a little bit dense. It's written, obviously, in the language of the 1800s. I want to say, like, 1812, but I'm not. Don't quote me on that. And I'd pull out, like, a highlighter, because it was a book I'd bought, and I just started highlighting lines, being like, oh my god, this guy gets it! I freaking just spilled my tea all over my lap in my enthusiasm over Percy Shelley. I love you, Percy, I really do. Yeah, so if you read A Defense of Poetry, you'll see my tea spilling, what my tea spilling excitement's about. He delves into the concept of the fact that when you do have this grain of inspiration and you set out to create it into a physical thing, a sculpture, a poem, book, it will be diminished in some way. The end product is never as spectacular as the unrealized imaginative impulse that gave birth to it. That's kind of his whole argument in his essay. And when I came upon that, luckily I didn't have a cup of tea with me. I was in the library at my university, and I just remember sitting there highlighting away and just falling in love with this man who died like 180 years before me. Like, goddamn. Why do you have to do that? Anyway. So I highly recommend that essay. And it's pretty easy to find. In fact, I recently recommended it to a famous artist named John Howe, who liked it so much that he purchased his own copy. Little name drop there. The reason I think that sometimes when we are telling a story and it does feel like it's shifting away from our original intent or our original inspiration is because it is going through that shift, that process of going from the discordant, maybe not discordant, but the impulse that hasn't yet congealed into something that has to live within the bounds of the here and now in 3 dimensions. I've experienced this with a lot of my books because, as you know, Darkling is a good example because it was inspired by a dream that I had. I've written other books inspired by dreams as well, but this one was obviously a very vivid dream, a very textured dream, and to try to capture the emotion that I felt as Willow in that dream, I did need the space and breadth of a book. And no, it isn't exactly like the experience of my dream. But I also think that we need to, kind of like in my previous vlog talking about letting go, I think we need to let go of the idea that our finished product will have the same impact as our inspiration, because your inspiration is coming from something deep within you. It's coming from your heart, it's coming from your soul, it's coming from a place where humanity has been stripped away and you are just raw and exposed to your dreams. When you actually create something, you have to use a pen and paper, you have to use a lump of clay, you have to use, like I said, elements that are only exist in the here and now, and exist, if you'll forgive me, on this mortal plane. So how do you take something that doesn't even have a body and give it a body? Because that's really what you're doing when you're creating art. It's never going to match. And you have to be open to that. And sometimes it can feel a little bit disappointing. With my actual art, with my paintings, I'm disappointed all the time because I'm like, that's not what it looks like in my head. But that, sometimes you will be inhibited by your skill. But that's also kind of the point of art, is it's not supposed to look exactly like what's in your head. Or if you're painting from a photograph, it's not supposed to look exactly like a photograph. It is a representation. And so sometimes it helps to think of whatever it is you're creating as a representation of that spark. And you'll never be able to capture that spark itself. And I think that that's a good thing. I think that that spark needs to reside within you, and it needs to stay where it is safe and fostered in your heart and soul. But you still can share it with the world to the best of your ability. The other part of Samara's question was about essentially maintaining the integrity of your story. That's how I interpreted her question. So that to me goes back to your source of inspiration, and you also need to accept the fact that just because you had the impulse from this source of inspiration, whatever it is, a thought, a scene, something you saw in real life that encouraged you to begin the creative process, doesn't mean that you have to adhere to it. You can take that and run, and you can run in any direction that you want. It is natural, as you're creating, as you're writing, for the story to take on a life of its own. Now, this question referenced it becoming something that you don't know how to handle. And I think I think stories take on a life of their own in 2 different ways. One way is because you have imbibed enough life into the characters that they are now making decisions, conscious decisions on their own. And they're telling you that the preconceived idea you had for where the story was going to go isn't the direction it's going to go. And they see and what that is too is your subconscious saying, this is a better story. Basically, this is a better story, and this is the story that needs to be told, rather than the one that you had in your head that you thought should be told for whatever reason. And that's part of why I don't outline, is because until I've spent a lot of time amongst my characters, I don't trust myself to know exactly where the story should go. And when I have outlined before, prematurely like that, for whatever reason, I get this mental block, and I find it really hard Just because I've written it down, it makes no sense. I know, it makes no sense. But I find it really hard to go, oh, but I can't have that happen because that's not how I said. That's not in the outline. That's not... And it's hard for me to disassemble then that plan in my mind, in my imagination, and replace it or supplant it with a different plan. That's just something strange that happens to me. Maybe it happens to a lot of other people. I don't know. I don't actually really get this into the nitty-gritty of the psychology of writing with basically anyone, except you guys on the internet. But so I think it stems from you trying to force a story to match your preconceived idea of what the story should be, and the story's rebelling. In that situation, I always think you should let it rebel and see where it goes. And if it takes you to a place you didn't expect, take a step back and look at where it is and assess it. I think the other reason a story can take on a life of its own is actually the opposite. It's when you're writing from a space, and I know I've mentioned this before, I think in my episode on the creative process. You could be writing from a place where you think that the impulse is all coming from yourself, only to discover that your subconscious has picked up kind of like a latent radio wave from our culture somewhere. And you've hooked onto a really easy trope to slot in to add tension to a scene or to enhance the dynamic between two characters. And really, it isn't true to the characters, it isn't true to the story, and it has no place there. I struggle against this a lot with my female characters. So I consider myself a feminist, that's no secret. I do tend to write a lot of female characters. Even being completely aware of how I'm portraying the women in my stories, these whispers that I thought I had killed or erased or gotten rid of in my head slip in. And you'll all of a sudden you'll be cruising along and something will mutter to you, hey, why don't you have those two have a thing? Or, ooh, put this in her past, or like abortion. Plots that are, I don't want to say token, because it really just depends on how you tell the story, but especially with female characters, we have so few examples of... We need a vast array of female characters. If you look at the array of female characters versus male characters, it's pitiful. And a lot of us are working to change that, but that's a completely different issue. But my point is, even being aware of that lack of diversity and trying to write a character who just feels authentic to whoever this person is that you're bringing to life is difficult, because there are voices from our culture and from your upbringing or from whatever that will slip into your work and will try to change it. And when that happens, it's difficult. It's difficult to recognize it, but it's key. You recognize it when that happens, and you stop, and that's when the story usually starts getting really, really weird and starts feeling... And I don't mean weird as in, then aliens came or this or that. I mean weird as in, you as the storyteller are starting to get a little uncomfortable. You know something's wrong, and then you just kind of stop writing because you feel like, who are you people? And what's happening? And where did my story go? For me, at least, every single time I've been able to go, okay, backtrack, and I'll find a moment. I'll find a moment when a character made a decision and started a different plot thread, or set events in motion, or started a new little social drama that actually had zero place in the story at all. And the only reason it was there was because some part of my subconscious decided, hey, this is easy, I've seen it before, I don't have to do as much work if I just pilfer this and stick it in there like it's a puzzle piece, And she won't notice. She'll just think she came up with it, it'll be great. Usually isn't great. And it usually puts a kink in things, because then but when it happens, it's good though. When it happens, it's good in a way for your writing process, because if you can't force yourself to stop, go back and really look at your characters in your story with fresh eyes and see what is off you will learn much more about the story you're telling and the characters. And you'll be like, that's what's off, even though I thought that she wasn't going to do that, or that's kind of the other example I was going to say, of even though I thought she would do this, maybe she wouldn't, but you would come across an instance where you've inserted something, perhaps subconsciously, that you didn't actually intend. It isn't true to the characters or the story. And if you can find that moment and just go back to it, you don't always have to get rid of everything you've written since. Really listen to the character. Give her room to breathe and tell you who the hell she is and what she would actually do and say. Not what you thought she should do or say, not what someone else, some voice in your head came in and thought she would do or say. Let her tell you, and then it will clear it right up. And this goes back to that conversation I had in one of my vlogs about writer's block, about how that's what I think writer's block is. It's when people get to a point where they've made a mistake in their storytelling and it no longer feels true to them. The story doesn't feel authentic and it doesn't feel like it's a piece of them. And that's because it's taken on this artificial level where it's sort of absorbed an aspect of our culture or our society, or you have tried to impose something on it, like a theme or a message that really doesn't have a place in the organic telling of the story. I hope that makes sense. Feel free to write back or ask me more questions if it doesn't. To summarize, I think that when a story does start to take on a life of its own or become something you don't recognize, just assess how you feel about that. Is it changing from the end? Is it changing the end from what you imagined it would be, but still feels like a story, still feels like the one that you are comfortable telling? Or has it shifted in a way that makes you feel detached and disconnected from the story you were telling? Because stories will naturally morph, and they will change, and they will surprise the hell out of you as you're telling them. And that's all wonderful. And that, to me, is the great adventure of writing and storytelling. And you have to give yourself space and your characters and your world space to let that happen. But if it's happening in a way that is separating you and making you feel isolated and alone as the writer, surrounded by some strangers who are wearing the masks of your characters, then that is when you need to take a step back and really look at your plot and your characters and analyze what happened in my story that feels untruthful to who they are and to what the story is. And guaranteed you'll always find something. It may take you a day or two, it may take you a week, and you'll probably come up with it while you're in the shower, while you're out on a run, while you're driving, doing something mundane. All of a sudden your subconscious will go, found it, and shove it to the front of your head. You'll be listening to a song and the lyrics will happen and you'll go, wait, that's how she felt when Walter was stealing the chess set, and so then the crowbar. Actually, that sounds like a really good story. I should write that. Become an English mystery novelist. I could do an English accent, eh? Actually, I have no idea what part of region in England that was supposed to be from. So thank you very much, Samara, for your question. And once again, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, or any prompts of, subjects you'd like me to cover. And of course, as always, please do subscribe, because, as you know, I don't post these on a regular basis. You never know when they're going to come out. If you want to be notified when they do, I think you have to subscribe. I'm actually not 100% sure on that, but I'm pretty sure you subscribe, and then it'll be like at least once a week, it'll be like, hey, did you know she put up something? You'll be like, alright. Or you'll be really cool like Samara and you'll get off work and you'll sit in your car and you'll watch it. I'm sure you're very sick of me by now. So, from me, and a rainbow unicorn that I've had since I was a little girl. That just got creepy. I don't know why, it just sounded creepy. We hope you have a wonderful day, or night, or morning, a wonderful existence as a human being. Until next time, see ya.